Tis turisas iuas vetros algis turisas ansos teuas othala turisas ansos gevo degas turisas.
Hello friends, how are you? My name is Ari Thurger, and today I'm going to give you one interpretation of the god Odin, but turned to the Thurza spiritual path. Surprisingly, a lot of my patrons are genuinely interested in Thurza since I've made a video about it, and so they asked me to explore a bit more of this neo-pagan path of Norse spirituality. By no means is this a video expressing one unique possible interpretation of Odin. This is just a video where I shall present you one of many possible interpretations we can make about this deity, but turn to a Thurza philosophical and spiritual understanding of Old Norse religion and mythology. With this being said, I would like to tell you that when I did the video on Thurza, that video isn't one single unique interpretation or understanding of this neo-pagan spiritual path. It's just a general idea focusing on the Gnosticism and left-hand path expressed within Thurza. So some people might agree, others not that much, but that's perfectly normal because spirituality isn't about a single truth. It's about exploring various realities, and through a constant development of our own abilities and the knowledge we acquire, we achieve new understandings. So that's the same thing I'm going to do with this video. I shall give you a possible interpretation of Odin turned to a more Thurza understanding, but I will remain impartial in this. Do what you will with the ideas I present you, and with an open mind, keep them and develop them to reach other paths on your own. The god Odin has a very dark origin, and in the myths it seems he symbolizes the archetype of those who undergo a solitary path of self-sacrifice and self-destruction to acquire deeper knowledge and achieve greater wisdom, and in the end fulfill one's destiny to walk towards enlightenment. Let's start this video. The god Odin is, without a doubt, one of the most famous pagan deities, certainly the most famous of the Norse pantheon, along with his son Thor. These past decades, Odin is generally seen as a demiurge and bringer of order, a wise deity giving a certain sense of security and quite accessible to mankind. But is order a good thing? How much chaos and destruction has Odin caused to implement his order? How much harm has he done to achieve such a high level of wisdom? Because there is no dispute, he is indeed described as a very wise cosmic being, and all his myths from start to finish are a never-ending quest for wisdom. But to achieve wisdom and a deep knowledge of primordial power, the entire myths of Odin are a self-centered, blood-stained and selfish path. Snorri Sturluson, acculturated in Christian ideals and religious dogmas, painted as a very benevolent version of Odin, as being the All-Father, the Creator, the King of the Gods, a version with too many similarities with the god of the religious reality of his own time. Centuries later, Richard Wagner gave us an absolute romantic idea of Odin in his operas. Subsequently, and with the increasing interest in the old ways since the 19th century, and with the creation of religious organizations based on Old Norse beliefs such as House of Thru, Odin remained a very benevolent god, even though the myths tell it otherwise. But the general idea constructed around Odin was that of a demiurge and a fervent champion of order, fighting against the forces of evil and chaos. And that's exactly where the problem resides. The dualistic notion of good and evil, inexistent in Old Norse beliefs, this notion of good and evil is a simplified notion that completely refuses any kind of perspective, because it's either good or evil, and no argument can come from that. But the Old Norse beliefs and mythology have no true dualistic notion of good and evil. Rather, they are more inclined to an understanding of two polarities, order and chaos, which doesn't have to necessarily be good or evil, but both at once. Order and chaos complement themselves. Because Odin is seen as a wise deity and on the side of order, in a dualistic notion he is automatically labeled as a good deity, and therefore the others he fights against have to be evil, because good doesn't fight good, right? How can Odin be evil if he is on the side of order and wisdom? Well, in a non-dualistic view, or rather in a view of order and chaos, Odin can still be a wise deity and bringer of order, but he himself is a chaotic deity. He isn't necessarily evil, but he isn't good either. There is no order without chaos, and no chaos without order. Throughout the myths, we see Odin in a self-centered, self-directed path, completely disregarding his own safety, and especially the safety and well-being of others. Numerous times he has tricked others, broke sworn oaths countless times, which take special notice that for a northern pagan society this was highly condemned, one of the worst actions a person could commit. Odin stole, killed, committed murder, caused terrible pain to others and himself, and all his actions go completely against the code of honor of the ancient Germanic and Norse. His desire for ultimate wisdom led him to commit numerous unorthodox actions, so to speak. Self-sacrifice, self-destruction, and leading to the destruction and misery of others, solely for his own benefit. In an evangelical dualistic worldview, he is without a doubt an evil god. On a non-dualistic worldview, he is what he is, the archetype of those who take a dark path towards enlightenment, sacrificing everything until they achieve true gnosis. A dark god with a high level of complexity than given credit for. A teacher, nonetheless, who shows a path of great sacrifice and destruction, not because he is pure evil, but because the light isn't the only path towards great wisdom. Great wisdom comes with sacrifices. As I've said before, there is no need for light in bright places. Light is required in the most dark places. Ascending from darkness into enlightenment is more difficult, more painful, but the final reward is far greater, because nothing else can destroy us if we already met destruction. Nothing else can cause us harm and bring us down if we have already experienced the darker aspects of life. So, let's take a look at a particular example on Odin and his solitary self-destructive quest for power and wisdom. One of the most famous myths about Odin is his self-sacrifice on the world tree. His actions in this account expose darker characteristics of this god. A sacrifice of himself to obtain the deep hidden wisdom of the runes. He pierced himself with his spear and then hanged himself for 9 days and 9 nights. No food, no water, losing blood, losing oxygen, terrible pain, and enduring this horrible trauma. A self-destructive path towards enlightenment to acquire deep primordial wisdom. I can understand why people see parallels here with Christianity and the self-sacrifice of God in the guise of his own Son to redeem a sinful world. Because people coming from a Christian background, and all of us with a collective consciousness very much rooted on Christian ideas, try to find parallels in our new pagan paths to facilitate the transition. However, Odin's sacrifice isn't to redeem a sinful world, nor to save anyone. Odin sacrificed himself by his own free will. In the Nordic tradition, there is no emphasis on a Messiah. Odin simply sacrificed himself for his own sake, in his solitary path to gain wisdom and power through self-destruction, abandoning his condition as mortal, abandoning his mortal restrictions that prevent him from gaining the hidden secrets. Odin sacrifices himself for the utmost secrets of the universe. Odin begins as a storm-wrathful god by the Proto-Germanic name Udanas, which later on evolved to Wotan, the Germanic deity of death and war ecstasy. With time, there was a great development around his cult until he reached Scandinavia as Odin. Before the introduction of Abrahamic religious concepts, Odin was a very dark and demonic god, both feared and revered by many, but nonetheless a role model. Perhaps not the safest and most comfortable role model, but without a doubt with important lessons to absorb. Odin's actions may not be to save humankind, but the path of Odin will certainly teach us to save ourselves from weakness, ignorance, and uncertainty. His myths teach us that the spiritual quest towards light isn't always associated with light itself and the good and beautiful aspects of life. We all seek the light, but the wise also enter in the dark in a spiritual quest to reach the light. Darkness is a prerequisite of illumination. As it is often said, every shadow is derived from brightness. Every shadow possesses the energy of the light. We have many myths concerning Odin and his actions that cause a trail of destruction and blood feuds solely so he can acquire what he wants. What he ever wanted was wisdom and power, and it doesn't matter how far he must go and the horrible things he must do as long as he achieves his goals and gets what he wants. Take the myth of poetry, for instance, a source of immense power and ancient wisdom. Let's not go into details on that myth, but I'm sure you are familiar with it, so you know how far Odin goes to get the myth of poetry. He tricks a giant into killing others for him, he kills him when he has no further need of the giant, breaks his oaths, tricked another giant and his daughter, shape-shifted and laid with her, lied to her, tricked her, stole the myth of poetry and caused great misery. That's not even the worst account. Treacherous, liar, murderer, thief, deceitful. Are we so blind to think Odin is the benevolent god? By no means I am suggesting that he is truly evil. Rather, he goes through a dark path during his entire existence to obtain liberation. And I am not saying that that is good or bad. It's a choice, motives as good as any. But to think Odin is good or to compare him with the monotheistic notion of a white light and bringer of salvation is completely unmindful and inaccurate. The entire myths of Odin from start to finish are just horrible, the destruction and misery he causes. And what's more fascinating is the account of Ragnarok, which marks the very end of Odin's quest for ultimate wisdom. His myths are filled with sacrifice, sacrificing himself and others, even those he loves and protects. The death of Odin in Ragnarok seems to be his final sacrifice. After killing or letting die everyone he came in contact with directly or indirectly, the final sacrifice is himself, his own death. The final sacrifice and the fulfillment of his true destiny and achieving liberation. He knew what was going to happen, and he accepted his fate and gave himself in order to complete his journey. I am perfectly aware that we have been for far too long into traditions that show us a dualistic world view that simplified our thinking and deeply affected our ability to criticize and analyze. There is this tendency to see things as good and evil, black and white, dark and light. And it's not easy to abandon that way of thinking and feeling. So it becomes quite hard to understand the Norse myths and see them in a perspective that it's completely outside this normal way of thinking. But when we realize the inexistence of a dualistic way of thinking in the old Norse beliefs, we start to understand the complexity of such beliefs. And after all, everything has both good and evil. Everything has order and chaos, because the moment we are alive and take action, that will always affect something or someone positively and negatively. Every decision you make requires the acceptance of one thing and simultaneously the sacrifice of another. If in paganism most people like to profess they are on a path more nature-oriented, then they should also understand that if we are subjected to the laws of nature, there is no true evil and no true good. Nature is what it is and does what it does to continue to exist and for its sole benefit. We can see Odin more or less in the same way. At least his actions are out of his own free will and not for a greater good or a greater evil, but simply for the benefit of himself. Odin seems to be closer to the archetype of the solitary quest for true gnosis, in a darker path to obtain illumination. Take special notice that what I said in this video is just one possible interpretation of Odin turned to a Thurzahru philosophical and spiritual understanding. I'm well aware that Thurzahru has its basis in anti-cosmic Satanism, which is a form of Gnosticism, and therefore dualistic views were brought into Norse myths in this path. But dualism itself is foreigner to the original nature of Old Norse beliefs. So in this aspect, Thurzahru is not the rebirth of any tradition of Old Norse practices and religious beliefs. It's something completely new and highly interesting in my opinion. However, and with this being said, I openly say that even though my own spiritual path also has some strong basis on Thurzahru, I do not believe in a dualistic world view, which is why this perspective I gave you of Odin in this video is related to a Thurzahru philosophical view, but softer, precisely because I do not believe in the duality of things, but rather in the chaos and order within all things. So in conclusion, in this perspective I have presented you, Odin can be seen as the archetype of the solitary person who undergoes a self-centered dark path towards enlightenment and greater wisdom, very much based on self-sacrifice and self-destruction to obtain liberation. Odin certainly goes to extremes, which is why it teaches us that the path towards illumination and great wisdom isn't always pleasant, and we must take in mind that in our spiritual paths sacrifices must be made. More often than not, sacrifices we are not physically and mentally ready to take. But we choose, and in our choices wisdom is revealed and we evolve through great sacrifice until we are ready to leave behind our condition as mortal beings and everything that prevents us from reaching true gnosis. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video and I hope you have enjoyed the background, a megalithic monument. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video and as always, talk with you.